I'm Craig Thielen, and this is the 1% Better podcast. Today I'm speaking with Richard McDonald, who is an author, a coach, a consultant, all in the space of human development, leadership, probably a few other things. So, welcome to the 1% Better podcast, Richard.
Thank you, Craig. Good to be here. Finally, it's taken a while, but we got this set up and ready to go.
Yes, and I know you're a world traveler, so I had to try to track you down. You spent a lot of time in South Africa, which you've certainly grew up there and spent a lot of time. I've spent a little bit of time, so we got you back in the States. I think you're calling in from Austin, Texas. So
I am
welcome back.
calling. Thank you, sir. Thank you. A quick question of you, Craig. What did you love about South Africa?
You could wind me up. I love the natural essence of the country, the natural beauty. Of course, there's the big five animals and the safari, and the color of the sunset struck me is something incredibly unique.
Nice.
Of course, it's got a lot of history, and every country I go visit, I try to learn, and I've learned so much about apartheid and the history of South Africa. And seeing the natural beauty, I mean, being along the coastline.
Right.
My first scuba dive in Durban, South Africa, which is way more challenging. Sometimes, like, when you're naive about things, like, it's one of the most challenging places to dive. I didn't know that. And then my second dive was with sharks, and no cages, of course. And so, but I didn't know any better. And my friends in South Africa said, "Hey, what's the problem? This is how we do things here." So I love the people. I've got great friends there. We've got a couple offices there. I could go on and on. The surf kind of culture, some of the university cities that I visited, but it's the natural beauty and the wild animals, the rhinos and the hippos and the lions, and that is something I'll never forget.
Well, thanks for sharing that, because part of what I'm going to end up referencing is my background and how that shaped me doing what I'm doing, and how I do what I do, and what I've learned so much. So let's
start there. Let's start with where you grew up and how you were raised, and let's start.
Yeah. Well, came into the world in a natural way. Parents were in love, and I was conceived. And I think at the moment, what I would share relative to the work that I do, and as you say, I've been fortunate to travel all over the world to do this work, but there's something about when we grow up, what shapes us. And I was so fortunate my father was a great fisherman, and to get to this particular place near the city that we lived, he had to go in 4-wheel drive vehicles, and I'd bundle up, and we had a Willys Jeep from the Second World War. And the only way to get there was over these roads. And so this place where I grew up is about, the little house that we grew up in is about half a mile from the southeastern tip of Africa. Why that's significant is that the storms that go by that part of the country are just incredible. And I was thinking about what I might say today. We'd had a chance to talk a little bit before. How do you condense 40 years of leadership development and training in a podcast? And I thought I'd start with a story.
Perfect.
So this story, there's two stories, and they both situated in this very unique place in Africa, in South Africa. In fact, all the roads are named after ships that have sunk in the area. So it gives you an idea of the wildness and just wildness of the ocean, the land, and this point. It's just, the storms are just amazing. And so I was very fortunate. There was a surf movie called Endless Summer. I traveled around the world in the 60s looking for the perfect wave. And back then, they declared this place where we were the perfect wave. And as a kid, I'd look at these storms in the ocean and I'd go, you got to be crazy. How would anyone ever paddle out into that ocean? And obviously, over years of practice and training, what I came to realize is the ocean, not unlike life, it's chaotic sometimes, it's calm sometimes. And I think leadership, sometimes your circumstances are perfect. And even if you're a bad leader, you would be successful.
Yeah.
But I think the true character of a great leader is when circumstances aren't good, when it's crazy and chaotic. that leader is able to find a path and is able to communicate that path to the people that will make work. And I learned early on that chaos doesn't get tamed, but you can operate in chaos when you learn the distinctions. And in this case, hydraulics, waves, ocean, water. And over the years, as your nervous system is learning and practicing, what looks chaotic and crazy to other people actually could be fabulous conditions for a surfer, somebody who is skilled at working in that environment. And I was thinking that really the only difference between someone who's great at something and someone who's not, at least a significant difference, is the distinctions that they get to see that other people don't get to see. And as a result, they can navigate more clearly. And I'd say that's where I learned mostly what I know about leadership at a raw, fundamental level in nature. You can't fight it. You have to blend with it. And I think the leadership of today requires blending, not fighting.
Well, I mean, that's a great way to start the show and your thinking. I mean, it's a very large, complex connection you just made to how humans operate, how we work together, how we lead to this big system we call, Earth. Powerful, but I love it. And it reminds me of another podcast. We had a gentleman by the name of Will Steger. You know Will?
Yeah, Will.
And,
yes.
Yep. And so one of the things that he said when he was in the most, challenging terrain on Earth, which is less like Earth and more like a foreign planet, which is Antarctica, and 100-degree sub-zero temperatures, etc. Doesn't know if he's going to make it. 40 days in a storm. And you talk about storms, and nobody's ever done it before, so there's no sort of reference. And I guess, how do you deal with that? And essentially, he said, I had to learn to give in, which means I'm not in control. I can't, us little 6 humans can't pretend that we're controlling, or I can't fight it. So I had to give into it, understand it, and then I could get clarity. Then I could get sort of peace and focus. I think it ties to what you're saying a little bit, but I want to come back to that story because that's a very profound connection that you're making. And I'm curious, you didn't obviously make that when you were 18 years old or something. You later in life meant, wow, I see the correlation here.
Right.
And our good friend Tom Goodell also made a similar correlation around fields, and or how, again, there's fields in the universe, right? There's force fields, energy fields, sound fields, light fields. There's essentially energy fields, and he made the connection from sort of the universe and other, physics and science to, like, we have interpersonal fields, and we have personal fields, and we have team fields. And so another very broad connection. But maybe before we dive into, like, a little bit more, I want to get to your book. Talk about, so we know that you grew up in this very, and I got the sense, you have to be in South Africa to understand, like, when I was in Durban, like, the Indian Ocean and the Arctic Ocean come together, probably right where you were raised, right? And so just downstream of that, or down the road, is Durban, and it's got very, fast currents for scuba diving, and it's cold. And so just the size of nature and the power of nature is just so evident when you're there. So talk a little bit about early career. Like, how did you get into this field? What did you study? Leadership is a field, especially people that teach it and coach it, write books about it, generally have, decades and decades of experience to make some of these correlations. But how did you get into it?
Yeah, boy, that's a great question. Certainly, after 40 years, it's good to reflect on how did it start? And in a very, very strange way. I don't share this often, but my father died when I was 18. And I was in a very formative stage of my life. And I had many people helping me navigate that loss. And as life would have it, I ended up leaving South Africa to go to school in the US, where I actually studied theology, which was an interesting beginning. I didn't ever think of myself as someone who would be a minister as such, but the school was just a starting point for me. And then while I was at a meditation class, I met a woman, and she said, I think you'd be interested to meet my boyfriend, who's a 3-time Vietnam vet, colonel, and obviously retired, and had become a spiritual warrior and was involved with a company called SportsMind. And they were a group of folks that actually they're all guys, and they developed this program for the Pentagon. It was a classified program. There's a lot being written about it. And there was a movie called Men Who Stare at Goats that was based on these guys.
Okay.
I happened to, after a meditation class, go and have an interview with this person. And strange as it would be, talk about feels. I'm having an interview with this very intense guy, Jack Surrey. And there was a shelf with books on it. And there was a practice sword for doing Aikido.
Okay.
And the sword was up on the shelf. And this really was the start of my work professionally with this company. While we were talking, this is somebody he's never met, I noticed that this Bokum, the sword, is rolling off and is going to hit him on the head. And for some reason, I just reached out, caught it a second before it hit his ear. I'm about 1 inch away from his nose. He doesn't move. I put the sword back, and for some reason, we don't miss a beat and we continue the conversation. And that was the beginning of me being invited in to this group of fascinating people. And that's how it started. 10,000 person AT&T program. And there we go.
That's amazing. That well, clearly you were very present in that moment and had very Jedi-like skills.
Yeah, looking back, you might say that at the moment it was just, I think, really being present that gave us that moment. And it's become thematic for me in leadership presence.
Well, that's a good segue into the book. So, I mean, you've worked with, as you said, that was your entry. You've worked with many large corporations, you know, in this field of leadership, working with thousands and thousands of people. So the book that you were co-author, The Vitality Imperative, really an interesting book. So first of all, there's literally been thousands of books on leadership written. So clearly it's a topic that we have a lot of interest in, and we as a human race struggle with, right? Because it's been written about over and over and over. And so, you know, my observations from reading it is that I love the fact that it sort of puts what I say, all things on the table. A lot of leadership books kind of segment to this sort of space. This puts everything, yourself included, and how you are as a person. So that's great. I like how it sort of forces you to ask tough questions about yourself and start with yourself. And then it breaks it down into 6, like, I think kind of like easy to understand concepts, which a lot of books do in various forms. But then it gives you immediately, like, okay, now here's how you practice it. Here's like some techniques. Here's how you put it into action. Because it's easy to understand a concept. It's very hard to actually live it, breathe it, and show up that way. And so those are some of the things that I pull from it. And just for the audience, you know, knowledge here, the sections are, and you call them promises: presence, empathy, purpose, authenticity, wonder, timing. And which I think all of us can go, yeah, those are all things that great leaders would have. We get the concept, but how do you actually live it? So those are my perspectives. But I wanted to get your perspective, being an author. Now it's 10 years later. Like, what do you think sets this book apart from other leadership books?
A good question. You said you'd have some good questions for me. I think, and so that book, I was a co-author with Mickey Conley and Jim Matroni and The Practice of Conversant. We make a distinction between doing and being. It's important that we learn how to do things, type on a typewriter, on a keyboard, on a computer. So there are skills. What we really see as most impactful, especially the higher up, I think it's true all across the board, but the higher up, it's the presence of how we are being. That is the significant, most important, and how the people's biology responds. So I think when you say the book is sort of an inclusive piece, because it says it starts really with how am I being, and how I am being influences the quality of all my actions. Thus, we start with the first promise of those promises, which is presence. It's the quality with which I bring self-awareness to myself and then take responsibility for how I'm occurring in the world. And we like to say that all learning starts with acknowledging what's present. And the power of a very effective leader is a person who can bring people into reality. So this is not foo-foo woo-woo stuff. It's actually the power of naming what's present. And from there, we make our choices and decisions. And so I think what sets the book apart and that particular practice is we didn't go into a room and come up with a theory. We observed what explains when people move toward and engage, and what explains when people move away and disengage. And there are just three basic principles. The first is the statement that all human beings, you and I and everyone listening, we have purposes, the things we care about, and of course then we'll have concerns, and we have our unique circumstances.
Mm-hmm.
If you perceive me as being aware of and maybe even caring about what matters to you, biologically you will move toward me because I occur as safe and a resource for what matters to you. If you perceive me as being unaware and perhaps indifferent or antithetical to what matters to you, your biology is going to say unsafe, I'm going to move away from you.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, this, if people understand this and practice it, you will see it's like magic. You'll do things and people will engage with you, and people will say, how did that happen? But it can't be done as an act of manipulation.
Right.
Yeah. So
it's not just a simple, asking someone a question. It's really, and that gets to some of the other promises, like having empathy, which is really understanding other people, getting to know them, what they care about, purpose, authenticity, like they have to, believe what you're saying, and it has to be authentic. So it kind of ties them all together, but it all boils down into what's important to them. Do they feel like you're aligned and helpful, or are you an impediment to that? Right.
Right.
Yeah.
And Craig, you just reminded me of a quote that I love. And it's the quote is, the first act of love is to listen. You could say the first act of respect is to listen. So wonder and curiosity is, I wonder why that's important to you. Yeah. Truly, I wonder, before I jump in with my point of view. And you can't manipulate that, because people know if you're doing that just as a seduction. It has to be real. You really have to care to understand.
Right. Yeah. I mean, you can't argue with that. So you guys talk about promises, which, by the way, the first promise that you have is your promise to the reader, which I thought was very interesting. I haven't seen a book like say, here's what we're going to do for you, other than we're glad you bought it.
You bought a book.
So one of them is we promise that, we're not going to belabor stuff. We're going to get through stuff pretty quickly. Another one is that it's going to impact you like pretty immediately. Like,
yes,
this isn't just something you read about and then, maybe a year or two later you get an aha, but immediately after practicing some of these principles, you're going to get a benefit. And what's the third one? There's a third promise, I think.
You'll have to remind me.
But I thought that was really good. I mean, it kind of caught my eye, like, okay, I'm going to read this. Yeah, here we go. And then finally, the promise, the more days when your leadership feels like an energizing privilege and fewer days like a burden, because we all know leading anything, including ourselves, our family, things in our community, our work, as you said, right out of the gates, like anyone can lead when the wind's at your back or when things are kind of going your way, but when things get tough is when real leadership gets tested. And so there's going to be tough days, and there's going to be days that things don't go your way. So you're going to have more days where things are going your way, essentially. So I tried to put that to the test and after every chapter. But what it did for me is it really slowed me down. Like, this is not a book you can just read in a few days or a week, because there's so much like deep insights, and then practice this, practice this. And so I felt like I really had to take it like a page or two at a time and then say, okay, I got to go practice this, right? Otherwise, that would have been out of sight, out of mind. So is that what you hear a lot from people who read it?
Well, Craig, I'm really delighted. I mean, I know you've got a lot of books, you interview a lot of people. I'm really feel privileged that you that affected you in that way, that you actually did practice it. So yeah, that feels really good. And I would just say, perhaps to the listeners, one thing you could practice after this podcast is listen to somebody that you care about and commit yourself to learning something new that you hadn't yet known about them. So if you were in a marriage or a relationship, after a period of time, perhaps kids, it just becomes functional. What if you slowed down, like you suggested, and maybe had a little longer eye contact and be curious? Often when we suggest this after a program or halfway through the program, people come back and say their significant other busted them and said, what did you learn at class? Because you normally never listen to me like this. So this really, people could do that as a pragmatic exercise. Just at work, go listen to somebody, especially the people you disagree with or where you get in resistance.
Right. We could certainly use a lot more of that in the world, couldn't we? Like, let's listen to each other, and let's stop with what we have to say and try to understand where other people are coming from, whether we agree with it or not, right? Love that. That's pretty good advice. Great advice. So one topic I wanted to ask you about that keeps kind of reoccurring, reading lots of different leadership books, is this notion of accountability. And it comes up every day at work. And as organizations, like, ultimately, that's what we want. We want people being accountable, because we all have plans and, goals and objectives and demands. And so when we say we're going to do something, let's make sure we do it. And so, but it's a complicated thing. And I think it's really intertwined and enmeshed in a lot of, these chapters of the book or promises in the book. So I wanted to just ask you, like, you've seen this, like, management leadership's trying to get accountability. And how do we do that? Because in some ways it's a double-edged sword. It feels like, we just want people to sort of commit their way, regardless of the circumstances, and not have empathy. But on the other hand, it's like, that's what the most successful teams and organizations have, is they have joined accountability, where they like, think about, like the Army, the Navy SEALs, like, they are accountable to each other. Like, that's what sort of that separates the Navy SEALs. Like, they have small teams. They trust each other with their lives. They know exactly what they're going to do, how they communicate. So how do we build that in corporate environments, is my long way of getting to that question.
Well, it's a great question. And it's actually a hot button for me. So I'll do my best to moderate my enthusiasm in my response. I noticed when you were describing accountability, there was something that you were doing with your body. You were going, we need to get accountability.
Right.
And I think you were channeling the frustration of leaders saying, we need to get accountability. Huh? Unfortunately, this methodology of getting accountability is very short-lived and requires pressure. However, what we do know, that the more sophisticated the contribution, the less people are motivated by the carrot and the stick. At a certain level of consciousness, the carrot and the stick will work wonders. The problem is you always have to have enough carrots and enough sticks.
Right.
But if you want people to actually take ownership, you might want to move up that continuum and use the 3 axioms to get your accountability. It really upsets me when I see, and sometimes it's just unintended consequence, where people say you must be accountable. You
Right.
ask those Navy SEALs, I
Right.
bet you they won't say they have to take care of their buddies. I bet you they'll say, I want to.
Mm-hmm.
When you get people by choice seeing themselves in the responsibility you're asking them to be accountable for, that's when you'll get engagement and trustworthy commitment. And here's the challenge. If you've skied or you've climbed, the natural tendency is when you're going fast is to lean back. It's not going to work well when you're skiing.
Right.
The natural tendency under pressure is to demand. The problem with the demand, if that's the way we're leading, people don't see themselves in a demand. They get diminished by the demand.
Mm-hmm.
The time to upfront to find the intersection of what you're asking them to do and how that actually serves what they care about is the sweet spot of accountability. Because we like to say, you can be held responsible because of your job title and what you get paid to do. But accountability is an attitude that says, I'm going to be accountable for the success of turning this out. What pushes accountability out is when we end up blaming and shaming people for not doing what we thought they should do. That's the antithesis to accountability. And unfortunately, in the hurry, that's often the behavior of leaders. So accountability for me is critical. What you could trust in accountability is if someone can see themselves in the request to commit.
Right. So it goes back to what you said earlier, which is understand what's important to them. And
Yes.
then is this important to them? Is this assignment? Is this responsibility? Is this goal important to them? Then they'll start leaning into it.
And as a leader, I help craft that meaning for them. They might not see the value,
Right.
but my job as a leader is to help them see, one, the importance of this and their unique role in satisfying that commitment.
Yeah, makes sense. And sometimes there's, I think, a big shift happening in the world with sort of command and control style leadership, which we all sort of grew up with, and it's sort of a military industrial age sort of carryover with how do you do quote unquote servant leadership, where instead of saying here's the assignment I want you to carry out, I'm going to tell you when, how much time, say here's the intent I have, here's the ultimate sort of outcome I want. Now you are a smart, capable, able person. How can we do this? How do you think we can do it? And so you're not telling them how to do the job because they're
Right.
capable, and you're sort of leveraging their talents, their abilities. But my intent is I want safety standards to go up.
Right.
And we all want that, right? Is that important to you?
Right.
So is that a shift that you see as well?
Yeah, and I think you just answered the question you asked me more skillfully in terms of less words, because that's exactly what it is. It is. So safety is a pretty obvious one, right?
Yeah.
We want our people to go home to their families.
Right.
Who would argue with that one, really? So the key, I believe, is finding the shared purpose, meaning what they care about and what the organization or the company is asking for. And it's in that intersection that we get true engagement, an authentic commitment, not an appeasement. Because you can hurry that intersection and say you don't have time, but I promise you, you'll end up spending more time dealing with perhaps passive aggressive behavior where someone feels disrespected and told what to do.
Absolutely. Well, hey, you're 10 years after the book was written. I'm just curious, hindsight is always 2020 and we all learn every day. What have you learned since, 10 years later? Is the sort of the book, still stands strong, the principles, or have you said, hey, we need to add a chapter, here's what we've learned since we wrote it?
Well, first of all, it's actually sobering to consider the book it's 10 years.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Oh, well, that is the true thing about when you're having fun, right? Time changes. It's a different relationship. So to answer your question, I think for me, what I'm most interested now in the work I'm doing, and if there was a chapter or something I'd embellish, how is it that I can help people find their center of gravity or their compass? There's chaos out there, and if we don't have a good compass, and so when we at Conversant work with folks, we spend a lot of time, like when we do on our big program, we spend a lot of time helping people articulate their unique purpose in life. Not the purpose as inside of a business, but the unique qualities and talents that they bring. And when people, it's not like it gets made up, it gets revealed, right? You're not making something up. You're not trying to make somebody something they're not. You're actually discovering authentically what is their unique way they bring value, and be unabashed by that. It gives us access to courage. It gives us access to clarity, and it gives us access to compassion. So I would say emphasis again on the importance of finding your true north. There's so much competing for our attention. If you don't have a hold on yourself, you become someone else's megaphone, so to speak. So that's what I would say.
Blow around in the South African wind, right?
Right, that's true, and so I would say to really emphasize coming back to yourself and what you know is important. The power of contribution when I live with integrity is, we haven't even tapped that yet.
Right.
So that's what I'd add.
Well, what you said reminded me of, about revealing what's already there. I think,
Yes.
That's a lifetime of work for all of us, right? But it reminds me of Michelangelo was allegedly asked, how do you create such beautiful statues out of a big chunk of rock? And he said, I don't create anything. I just reveal what's already in that rock, and I just take away and reveal what's already in it. That's an interesting way to think about it, because us, sort of people that aren't sculptures, we look at it as a rock. Like, how would we chip that thing away into something so beautiful? And he looked at the complete opposite. It's already in there. I'm just revealing it.
Yes, beautiful. That's so great. I love that. I mean, I've heard that in the past, and I really love that. And here's the challenge for leaders. If you say you don't have time to attend to the quality of relationships, it's going to come back and bite you in the butt. In the world that is so complex, there's no one person smart enough to answer the questions and the challenges that business face.
Yeah.
We are smarter together than by ourselves. And as Mickey says, is the co-author there, difference plus trust is wisdom.
The difference plus trust.
Difference, diversity,
I see.
plus trust creates intelligence, wisdom,
yes,
and gives us access to be able to solve these challenging problems. The question, of course, is how do we develop trust with each other?
Right. Well, I think the 6 promises might be one answer to that, right?
And I'll say the summary to that is be direct, be straight, don't beat about the bush. And there's a way to learn to have those conversations. But I think we all need to risk ourselves more for the sake of, I don't want to get grandiose here, humanity, but inside of a business. I was just talking to somebody today. They were massaging information, financial information, so that it didn't annoy the senior person.
Right.
Now that senior person's trusting that that information is accurate, making decisions. And the challenge, of course, is how do you say the difficult thing? Not being against, but being for the success. And so for me, I think we have to really, each of us, ask inside, what can we still give if we didn't let fear dominate us? And here's the great thing. Here's the great thing that just is the great thing. It doesn't matter who else signs up to do this. when I live in integrity with myself and I have the courageous conversations, I don't lose.
Yeah, that's profound, and that gives you, like you said, if you believe that, it gives you courage to do do anything, but do the easy thing, which is be yourself, right?
Right, right,
Which should be the
right.
easy thing, which sometimes feels like the hard thing. Well, Richard, we could go on, and maybe we'll get another podcast to go deeper. But I want to close with the same question that everyone gets, which is look back at that 40-year career and all the everything you've learned working with clients in this field and training that you've done, and go back then to your 18-year-old self, and what would you want to like give yourself, what knowledge, what insights, or let's say you have grandchildren, you want to share some wisdom, what would you share?
Take the time to have an intimate relationship with yourself, and then be courageous to live your life authentically. That's what I would have told myself when I was 18.
That's beautiful.
Instead of appeasing and trying to please people for some false promise, if you abandon yourself, it's a hard place to come back from. So don't abandon yourself.
Well, that's beautiful. So thank you, Richard. I appreciate the time, and thanks for being on 1% Better.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and I wish everyone listening to this just one step closer to being yourself and risking it. It would have been well worth it.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Craig.